There's something paradoxical about human behavior, especially in relationships. We often don't see the full value of something until it's no longer within our reach. This is especially true when it comes to how some men recognize a woman's worth. When you were there giving, loving, showing up, trying, explaining, forgiving, your presence became a given. He may not have done this out of malice, but out of something far more dangerous: comfort. Familiarity, that quiet assumption that you'd always be there, and in that assumption, he began to take you for granted. He thought he had time. He thought he could mess up a little more, that he could fix things later, that you'd always forgive one more time, but you didn't. You reached the edge, and when you stepped away, truly stepped away, not as a strategy, not as a game, but from a place of clarity, that's when something clicked. That's when the fog lifted. That's when he finally began to see you in a way he hadn't before. Not because you changed, not because you became someone else, but because your absence created a contrast he could no longer ignore. That's the brutal truth. Realization rarely comes in the warmth of our presence, it comes in the cold of our absence. While you were still there, he didn't have to imagine life without you. He didn't have to wonder who would text him in the morning or remember that small thing he said in passing. He didn't have to worry about whether you still cared. Your love was consistent, and that consistency ironically became invisible, because humans have a strange habit of becoming numb to the things they believe are permanent. And even if deep down he loved you, admired you, or wanted to do better, the urgency to act was never fully there. Why? Because he still had access to you, because he thought he had time, because he believed, perhaps subconsciously, that you'd always wait for him to grow up or show up. But the moment you walked away, and not just physically, but emotionally, mentally, and energetically, that belief shattered. He was no longer met with your patience, no longer cushioned by your comfort, no longer reassured by your availability, and suddenly he was left alone with the very things he'd been ignoring: your effort, your presence, your value. That's when it hits the hardest, because there's no more distraction, no more excuses, no more fallback. Just silence, and that silence starts to echo all the moments he missed, every chance he had to love you better, every conversation he dismissed, every time he thought you'd stay, no matter what. The irony is painful. The realization he needed in order to change, in order to see you clearly, could only come when you were no longer there to witness it. That's the hard part for many women to accept. You spent so much time trying to make him see, to help him understand, to prove your worth. But it wasn't until you stopped trying, until you stopped being there, that the message finally got through. Your departure did what your words never could. It forced him to sit with the consequences of his inaction, and the moment you walked away became the mirror he couldn't avoid anymore. Some women hold on, hoping that one more conversation will make him realize. One more night, one more chance, but the truth is, no one changes from comfort. No one wakes up when everything stays the same. Real growth, real awakening comes from disruption, and your absence was that disruption. It shook the foundation of his reality. It forced him to reckon with a world where your laughter wasn't there, your encouragement wasn't there, your softness wasn't there. And when a man loses a woman who truly cared, who genuinely loved him, who was emotionally invested, it doesn't just sting. It lingers, because he realizes too late that he had something real and didn't treat it like it mattered. Now, that realization doesn't always come immediately. Sometimes it takes days, sometimes weeks. In some cases, it takes months or even years, but it comes, whether he tells you or not, whether he ever reaches out again or not. There's always a moment, quiet, private, and deeply sobering, where he sees it. He remembers how safe he felt with you, how much effort you put in, how many chances you gave him, and he remembers how he treated it like it was optional, like you were replaceable. And that thought doesn't sit easily with any man who has even the slightest bit of self-awareness. This isn't about revenge. It's not about making someone regret their actions for the sake of your ego. It's about understanding that sometimes the most powerful message you can send isn't said with words, it's communicated through your absence. Through your choice to walk away, not because you stopped caring, but because you finally started caring about yourself more. Because you realized you deserved someone who didn't need to lose you to value you. And in that act of walking away, you didn't just change your story, you forced him to confront his. It's easy to get stuck wondering if he ever truly realized what he had, if he ever felt the weight of your absence. But the answer, more often than not, is yes. Because the moment you walked away, he lost more than just a relationship. He lost someone who genuinely showed up for him, someone who believed in him, someone who gave him love without conditions. And even if he never says it out loud, even if his pride never lets him admit it, he knows. Deep down, in the quiet hours of the night, when no one is around and the silence grows loud, that's when the truth settles in. He realizes, just not when you were still there. When you're emotionally invested in someone, your first instinct is usually to communicate, to explain, to argue, reason, plead, or try to reach them in hopes that if you just say the right thing, they'll finally understand. You may spend days crafting the perfect message, weeks waiting for the right time to talk, and months believing that clarity will come if you just keep trying. But what most people, especially women, don't realize is this. Silence, when it finally comes, carries more power than all those words ever could. Your absence, your quiet, firm decision to remove your energy echoes louder than the loudest confrontation. There's something uniquely powerful about no longer being reactive. While you were still emotionally available, still responding to his messages, still participating in arguments or explanations, he could convince himself that he still had access to you. Even if the words were angry, even if you were hurt, in his mind, that interaction, that emotional charge was proof that you still cared, that you were still tethered to him in some way. Because energy, whether loving or frustrated, is still attention. And as long as he had that, he never really had to confront the consequences of how he made you feel. But silence is different. Silence is cold. It's unfamiliar. It doesn't react. It doesn't reach. And that's what makes it so devastating to someone who expected you to always be there. Your absence removes the mirror he used to reflect his ego. Suddenly, he can't define himself by your approval, your forgiveness, or even your emotional responses. Suddenly, he's forced to deal with the quiet space where your voice used to be, and that space is where reflection begins. That's where the weight of his actions, his words, and his neglect truly hit. When you go quiet, when you truly detach, you send a message without ever having to type it, say it, or scream it. You say, "I'm done. I've tried everything I could. You don't get to have my energy anymore." And unlike the words he could deflect or dismiss, your absence is undeniable. It's not up for debate. It doesn't seek validation. And that's what stings the most, because silence isn't seeking to be understood anymore. Silence doesn't want closure. Silence is closure. This shift is jarring for him, especially if he was used to a pattern where conflict always ended with reconciliation. Maybe he expected that after a fight, you'd send a message, or that after he pulled away, you'd chase just a little. Maybe he believed, even if subconsciously, that he could hurt you and you'd still be the one to fix it. And when you don't, when you resist the urge to explain one last time, the silence becomes suffocating. It begins to eat away at the comfort he took for granted. He may tell himself at first that you're just being dramatic, that you're giving the silent treatment, and that you'll be back. But as time passes and you remain still, his certainty starts to fade. The realization creeps in slowly and then all at once. It shows up when he checks his phone and sees no message from you. It hits when he posts something, hoping you'll respond, and gets nothing but silence. It echoes in the moments he used to expect you to show up, and you don't. It's not that you stopped caring overnight. It's that you realized your energy was being wasted on someone who wasn't willing to meet you halfway. You realized that giving more of yourself wasn't inspiring him to appreciate you more, it was giving him more space to take you for granted. So you did the only thing left to do, you stopped giving. Not out of bitterness, not to manipulate him, but out of a need to protect your peace. And here's where it gets even more powerful. Your absence doesn't just make him miss you. It makes him miss the way he felt around you. The sense of being needed, the emotional connection, the safety, the intimacy, all the things he thought he could get from you indefinitely gone, not because you changed, but because he didn't appreciate it when it was freely given. Now, in your silence, he begins to feel the true cost of what he lost. He starts to question things. Was it really that bad? Did he misread how serious you were? Why aren't you reaching out? Has someone else taken your place in those quiet spaces? Those thoughts begin to swirl, not because you said something, but because you didn't, and that not knowing becomes more powerful than anything you could have screamed during an argument. It's haunting because it forces him to confront his own behavior without distraction, without noise, without your presence to absorb the blame. It's important to understand that this kind of silence isn't about withholding love to gain control. It's not about games or manipulation. It's about reclaiming your power. It's about recognizing that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to stop trying to be understood by someone who refuses to listen. And when you do that, you create space, not just for him to realize what he lost, but for you to begin healing, growing, and remembering your own worth. Eventually, he will feel it, the silence, the loss, the shift, whether he admits it or not, whether he reaches out or not. That absence becomes the lesson. It becomes the moment he looks back on and realizes, she didn't just stop talking, she stopped fighting for me. And that's when he understands the real cost of his indifference. You see, silence isn't weakness, it's clarity, it's peace, it's strength, and when used wisely, it becomes your most powerful message, one that says everything you ever needed to say without a single word. At first, when you go silent, he doesn't panic. He doesn't assume it's over. His ego steps in like an overconfident friend and reassures him. She's just upset. She'll come back. She always does. This ego is built from patterns, the same ones that taught him he didn't need to change, that apologies could be delayed, and that emotional effort could be optional. It tells him you still care, even though you're quiet. It tells him you're just making a point, giving him a scare, playing hard to get. His ego doesn't recognize the shift in your silence, not at first. In the beginning, he may even feel a little smug. Detached, maybe he thinks he's in control of the situation, or that you're just doing what emotional women do when they're frustrated. He doesn't take your distance seriously. Instead, he leans on the past every time you forgave him, every time you stayed longer than you should have, every time your words said, "I'm done," but your actions proved otherwise. His confidence isn't grounded in love or security, it's based on repetition. His ego thrives on predictability, and your silence, in its early stages, still fits into his outdated idea of how this story usually goes. But then, time starts passing, and you still haven't returned. You're not sending emotional texts, you're not liking his posts, you're not checking in, and something inside him shifts not all at once, but slowly, subtly. What he expected to be a temporary break starts looking more like a permanent absence. And that's when his ego begins to crack, because the very thing he relied on, the belief that you'd always circle back, is now working against him. Instead of comforting him, it starts to feel like a lie. A desperate hope clinging to a version of you that no longer exists. Now, he starts remembering all the times he didn't show up for you, the conversations he avoided, the promises he made and broke. He thinks about the way you used to light up when he texted back and how he started replying less. He remembers when you asked for more and he brushed it off, and now, without your energy validating him, he's left sitting with a version of himself that's hard to admire. The mask falls, and where his ego once stood confidently, now there's doubt, guilt, maybe even regret. But the ego doesn't die easily. It tries to fight back. It may tell him she's just trying to make a point, or she must be talking to someone else. That's the only reason she's quiet. In its final defense, it tries to reframe your silence as a tactic, because to admit that you've actually moved on would mean admitting that he misjudged you, that he mistook your love for weakness, that he counted on you staying, even when he gave you every reason to leave. And yet, that realization begins to sink in deeper. It's in the quiet moments when the world slows down and distractions fade that your absence screams the loudest. It's when he rolls over in bed and sees no message from you, when he reaches for his phone and finds nothing but empty notifications, when he thinks about telling you something funny or important, only to remember you're no longer his person. His mind races. Maybe he replays old conversations. Maybe he scrolls through pictures or rereads texts trying to find clues. Was there a final moment where you switched off for good? He starts searching for the turning point, hoping he can rewind something that's already slipped away. And in that desperation, the ego once so loud grows quiet, because it realizes that no amount of pride can fill the space left behind by someone who gave their heart and then chose to protect it instead. The most ironic part is that the thing he thought would bring him power, your silence now makes him feel powerless, because the control he once believed he had was never real, it was borrowed. It existed only because you allowed him access to your energy, your emotions, your presence. And now, with that access gone, he's forced to face the version of himself you no longer wanted to engage with. That's a harsh mirror, one that no ego enjoys standing in front of. He might reach out casually at first, maybe with a weak excuse or a vague message, testing the waters, seeing if the old script still works. But when you don't respond the same way, or worse, not at all, that's when it finally clicks. She's really gone, not just physically, but emotionally. And that's the moment that flips everything. That's when his ego, once so sure, so arrogant, is replaced by something rawer, a quiet voice that says, "You messed up, and she's not coming back this time." This process doesn't look the same for every man. Some take longer to reach that realization. Others mask it with bravado, pretending they're unfazed, but inside, the truth gnaws at them, because ego can't replace connection. Pride can't hold your hand. And silence, when it's real, when it's final, isn't something you recover from easily, especially when it comes from someone who once gave you everything. So when you walk away in peace, when you withdraw your love not as a punishment but as self-preservation, you do something more powerful than any argument ever could. You force him to grow or to lose you completely. And that's a decision he has to make in your absence, not in your presence. The ego may have convinced him you'd return, but it didn't account for the woman who finally chose herself. And once he sees that, once he truly understands that you're not waiting for him to get it together anymore, he knows not just that you're gone, but that you're free. When you were around, he didn't have to look too closely at himself. Your presence gave him comfort, distraction, and sometimes even justification for his inaction. As long as you were there messaging, calling, reaching out, checking in, he could use your emotional labor as a shield against his own self-reflection. You carried the weight of the relationship, the emotions, the repairs. He didn't have to ask himself the hard questions, because you were still answering them for him with your attention. But when you walk away, and when that walk is quiet, intentional, and unwavering, something begins to shift not in you, but in the time that follows. Time becomes his mirror. At first, it feels like freedom. He might even convince himself that the silence is a break he needed, a breather from pressure, from confrontation, from expectations he didn't feel ready to meet. Maybe he tells himself he's fine, that he can do what he wants, that he's better off without emotional tension. He might distract himself with friends, casual conversations, or meaningless flings, anything to avoid the sudden emptiness that your absence created. But distractions have short lifespans, and when the noise settles, time starts whispering truths he hasn't wanted to face. Without your voice reminding him of who he could be, without your emotional compass guiding him towards something deeper, he starts to feel lost, not dramatically, not all at once, but slowly and consistently. Every day, a little more of the comfort fades, and the weight of his own unaddressed habits grows heavier. Time, once his excuse, becomes his exposure. It forces him to sit in the decisions he made, the chances he didn't take, and the love he let slip through his fingers. What once felt like control, not responding, not committing, not changing, now looks like avoidance. It looks like fear. It looks like pride that cost him something rare. He might find himself thinking, what was I really afraid of? Or why didn't I just meet her halfway? These are the questions he never had to face when you were there, because your presence made the discomfort easier to manage. But in your absence, those questions don't just visit, they stay, and time, being patient and unforgiving, doesn't let him hide from the answers. He starts noticing things, the way other people speak to him without the warmth you used to offer, the hollow nature of attention that doesn't carry emotional depth. He remembers the little things, your tone when you said his name, your instinct to check on him when he was off, your ability to make him feel seen without him even asking. And now, in the echo of silence, those things aren't just memories, they're reminders of what real connection feels like. And more painfully, what it feels like to lose it. Time doesn't just reflect what you were, it reflects who he was when he was with you. Maybe you made him laugh when no one else could. Maybe you challenged him, encouraged him, made him believe he could be more than his history, more than his excuses. And when you left, you took that mirror with you, the one that showed him not just what he was, but what he could have been if he had chosen differently. And that realization, that gap between who he was and who he could have been, becomes a heavy burden to carry. People often think silence is passive, that when someone walks away and chooses not to engage anymore, it means they gave up. But true silence, the kind that comes after trying, after effort, after clarity, is an act of strength. It creates space, and in that space, truth rushes in, not your truth, because you've already found it. His truth, the one he's been running from, the one that time won't let him escape. Eventually, he might try to reach out, a short message, a casual hey, or something subtle enough to preserve his pride while still testing your boundary. But when you don't respond, or when your response lacks the emotional weight it once carried, time speaks even louder. It tells him she's not waiting, she's not hoping anymore, and that's when regret becomes real. That's when the gravity of his choices, or his lack of them, starts to hit him in ways he didn't anticipate. Time has a way of removing illusions. What he once believed was confidence may now look like arrogance. What he thought was patience may look like avoidance. What he convinced himself was protecting his heart now looks like sabotaging something rare. And the more time passes, the more clearly he sees what you already knew. Love doesn't wait forever. Not real love, not love that knows its worth. In this space, he may finally understand something deeper, that your silence wasn't meant to punish him. It was meant to save you, that your leaving wasn't about abandoning him. It was about choosing yourself, and most of all, that the time he took for granted was the very thing that eventually turned against him. Because time doesn't lie. It doesn't protect egos. It simply shows us, again and again, the consequences of what we refuse to confront. And so now, as he sits in that quiet space you once filled, time becomes his teacher, a relentless, silent mirror that won't let him forget. Not the way you loved, not the way you tried, and not the moment you chose silence, not out of weakness, but because you finally saw that your peace was more important than proving your value to someone who didn't want to see it. He will realize it, whether he admits it or not, whether he reaches out or not. He will feel it in the space where you used to be. Time will make sure of that. Regret is rarely loud at first. It doesn't crash into his chest the moment you leave. It doesn't show up the next morning with flowers and apologies and a sudden clarity about what he lost. No regret is more subtle than that. It begins in the quiet spaces he never noticed before, when you're not around to fill them. It begins when he's doing something ordinary, driving to work, brushing his teeth, scrolling through his phone, and suddenly your name flashes in his mind like a ghost memory. Not because something specific triggered it, but because that's how the mind works when something meaningful goes missing. At first, he brushes it off. He tells himself he's fine. He convinces himself he made the right decision, or at the very least, that he has time. Time to figure things out. Time to come back if he wants to. Time to test if you're really gone. But every time he tells himself that, he feels a little less certain. Because you're not showing signs of waiting. You're not orbiting him anymore. You're not posting cryptic quotes or emotional messages. You're just gone, and the silence isn't angry, it's clean. That terrifies him. Regret starts with questions. Quiet ones. What if she was the one? Why didn't I just show up when she needed me? Did she really mean it when she said she was done? And even worse, is she with someone else now? These questions don't arrive all at once, they build. A drip feed of doubt that slowly corrodes the walls he built around his emotions. They show up when he least expects them, when he hears your favorite song, when he passes that restaurant where you once sat across from him, smiling in a way that made him forget his fears. When he realizes he hasn't laughed like that in a while. The mistake many people make is thinking that men don't feel it, that once they walk away, they move on without thought. But in truth, many men are just good at delaying their feelings. They push them down, they cover them up with pride, ego, or distraction, but none of those things are permanent solutions. They're temporary shields, and once those shields crack, and they always do, the emotions flood in, unfiltered, and often too late. Regret creeps in as time stretches out, when the days go by and your absence becomes routine, when he checks your profile and sees you're still living, still smiling, still moving forward, and none of it includes him. That's when it stings the most, because it's not just that you're gone, it's that you're healing, you're happier, you're thriving in a peace he never knew how to protect. And for the first time, he realizes something devastating. You didn't need him to find that peace. In fact, you may have needed to lose him to find it at all. He might not tell anyone about these feelings. He might joke with his friends, act unbothered, keep up the image that he's doing great. But when he's alone in the quiet, that's when the truth comes out. That's when the weight of his decisions settles onto his chest like a quiet ache he can't quite name, and no one else sees it because regret isn't always dramatic. It's not always tears and desperation. Sometimes it's just that one moment of stillness when he realizes he can't call you like he used to. He can't reach for you when his world feels heavy. He lost that access, and he gave it up so carelessly. He might start replaying the last few months, trying to find the turning point, the exact moment when you stopped trying, when your tone changed, when your eyes didn't search for his approval anymore. He'll wish he had noticed it then, that he had done something different, said something better, listened more deeply, acted more intentionally. But that's the thing about regret. It's only clear in hindsight. And by the time it shows up fully, the damage is often already done. Sometimes he might try to fix it. He might send a message, a vague "hey, just thinking about you," or something more direct, "I miss you." But by then, you've already changed. You've already grieved the relationship. You've already grown in ways that he hasn't witnessed, and that makes him a stranger to the version of you that exists now. His regret, no matter how genuine, doesn't guarantee access anymore. And that's a brutal lesson, one that regret teaches slowly without mercy. What haunts him most isn't just losing you, it's realizing you gave him every chance not to. You weren't quick to leave, you were patient. You asked, you waited, you communicated, and in return, he stayed comfortable, or confused, or cowardly. He mistook your loyalty for permanence. And now, in the quiet wake of your departure, he sees the truth. That even the strongest woman has a limit, that even unconditional love requires effort in return, and that no one, no matter how much they care, will wait forever for someone who refuses to meet them halfway. Regret doesn't shout, it doesn't knock down doors, it waits, it sits with him at dinner, it follows him into bed, it rides in the passenger seat of his car. It's the silence he hears when he turns off his music. It's the face he sees when he closes his eyes and remembers what it felt like to be loved without earning it, and how easily he took it for granted. And as time continues to pass, the regret doesn't fade. It grows, not because he can't move on, but because he now understands what he lost, fully, finally, irreversibly. Would you like me to continue with keynote #6? Some people leave a temporary mark, a memory that fades, a lesson that lingers but eventually dissolves into the noise of the past. But then there are the rare ones who leave something deeper, a presence that sticks in the quiet spaces of a person's soul, a warmth that doesn't vanish even after the connection is broken. When a woman walks away after giving everything, her energy, her heart, her patience, her truth, and does so with grace, peace, and finality, she doesn't just leave a void. She leaves a question. And for the man who failed to meet her where she stood, that question never fully goes away. Was she the one? At first, it's easy to dismiss the thought, especially when he's still stuck in his patterns. He might tell himself she was too intense, too emotional, too demanding anything to justify why he couldn't or wouldn't show up in the way she needed. But as time goes on, those defenses weaken, the noise around him quiets. The distractions lose their edge, and when he finally sits with himself truly alone, the weight of that question becomes harder to ignore. It comes up in the most unexpected moments, not just when he's lonely, but when he's doing well, achieving goals, meeting new people, living life. Because in those high moments, something still feels incomplete. Something still feels like it's missing a witness, a partner, a mirror that once reflected the best version of who he could be, and then her image surfaces again, not just her face, but her essence. Her fire, her softness, her challenge, her belief in him, and that question reappears. Was that the one who actually saw me? Because deep down, he knows she did. He knows she saw him not just for what he was, but for everything he could become. She didn't just love him for what he gave her, she loved him through his indecision, his fear, his silence. She loved him with hope, and that kind of love isn't easily found again, especially when he knows he didn't match it. When he knows she would have stayed, grown with him, fought beside him, if only he had given her a reason. The hardest part about that kind of regret isn't just the loss, it's the unknowing. He'll always wonder what life would have looked like if he had said the right thing, acted sooner, leaned in instead of pulling back. What would have happened if he had chosen courage over comfort, if he had been willing to meet her in the space of vulnerability instead of running from it? He may go on to meet other women, he may fall in love again, he may even get married, build a life, have a family, but that question, it doesn't disappear. Because no matter how far life carries him, the memory of the woman who loved him unconditionally but refused to lose herself to keep him, that memory becomes part of his internal story, not as guilt, necessarily, not as some looming regret that ruins his future, but as a quiet, aching what if that never fully leaves. He'll think about the conversations they had, the way she challenged his thoughts, the way she wouldn't let him off the hook with half-truths or emotional distance. He'll remember how she laughed, how she looked at him like she believed in his greatness even when he didn't believe in himself. He'll remember how she knew him deeply and how she chose him again and again, until the day she chose herself instead. And that choice, her choice to walk away, becomes the turning point in his life story. Because it forced him to see the reality he had avoided, that love isn't just about chemistry or desire, it's about showing up, it's about presence. It's about being brave enough to give your heart to someone who already gave theirs, and not just when it's convenient, but especially when it's not. He'll always wonder because, whether he says it out loud or not, he knows what he lost. And what he lost wasn't just a woman, it was a version of himself he only ever saw through her eyes. A man who was capable of growth, of honesty, of deep, soul-level connection. She brought that out of him, or at least, she tried to. And now that she's gone, so is that mirror. The irony is, he might understand her fully only in her absence. He might replay the things she said, the ones he dismissed, the ones he ignored, the ones that now make perfect sense. And as painful as it is, that realization is a gift, a harsh one, yes, but a necessary one, because through it he learns, maybe too late to get her back, but not too late to grow, not too late to become the kind of man who would never let someone like her slip through his fingers again. But even if he does grow, even if he transforms and becomes everything she once saw in him, she still becomes the origin story, the one he thinks of when people ask about his turning point, the one he silently thanks when he recognizes the love he wasn't ready for. She's the lesson, the memory, the what if, and in that quiet space between what was and what could have been, he'll always wonder, was she the one, not because he needs an answer, but because some questions never go away. Especially when the woman you lost was the one who truly saw your soul.